This week, 10 with Ken goes on the road to Peterborough, Ontario, and the campus of Fleming College. I was honored to launch their Thought Leaders Speakers Series and to catch a few minutes with President Maureen Adamson.
So you were once Deputy Minister responsible for the status of women in Ontario.
Correct.
So how are we doing?
It's alarming, the pay gap that still exists between women and men, and I think this is one that colleges have a responsibility to fill.
This week, Maureen Adamson on diversity and equity in higher education.
So this week we're at Fleming College and I'm speaking with the president, Maureen Adamson. Thanks for taking some time, Maureen.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. So how are we doing as a society now on equity of access and equity of success and performance of women in our higher ed system, in our programming, and colleges in particular?
So we've got a lot of work to do. When you think about even organizations and what is a high-performing organization, it is a balanced board of governors. And today we still don't see that in many of our industries. I think that's something we need to start teaching our students early on about being leaders in the community, about being volunteers. Our industries all over Canada rely on volunteers, but that leadership at the very top level has to start, I think, with the colleges, the universities. The students that we need to be thinking about are those that we're cultivating at a very young age, particularly as it relates to trades and technology. We need to debunk the theory that women don't want to go into trades and technology because it's dirty work. It's not. So I think for us in Peterborough, our focus and surrounding area is going to be trying to cultivate the interest in these important areas that we know will be our future at a very young age. It's alarming, the pay gap that still exists between women and men, and it's further alarming that women on boards and holding the highest positions, CEO and so on, still don't make the same as men. And we know that there's a gap of the labor market, and I think this is one that colleges have a responsibility to fill.
And you've been in this role at Fleming how long now?
6 months.
6 months. So just getting started, really.
Yes.
But you've probably had an opportunity to meet a lot of your counterparts from other colleges across Ontario or across the country.
I have.
Am I right in thinking there's certainly more female leaders of colleges than of universities in Canada?
I can't speak to universities. I think it's still male-dominated, and in fact, college system is still male-dominated, although it's making progress. With my recruitment, there are also 2 other female leaders recruited right around the same time. So I think we're making strides.
More and more we're seeing institutions looking at new markets, and in particular international and online markets, as a way to continue their economies of scale with fewer local students to work with.
As we look at the next couple of decades in Canada and around the world, there's a need to encourage participation in post-secondary by more and more diverse students to meet the needs of the labor market.
So more and more immigration drives the youth cohort that is traditionally going to post-secondary. In general, Canadian institutions across the country have seen double-digit enrollment increases of international students. Also, we're seeing more and more students with disabilities arriving on our campus as we try to increase the participation of underrepresented groups.
We need to include more diversity in terms of background, in terms of Indigenous status, in terms of gender.
So more and more emphasis on Indigenous students, dual credit programs targeting underserved groups, underrepresented groups in post-secondary.
What are some of the ways in which colleges like Fleming can rise to meet that demand to be more inclusive and of diversity?
So Fleming has a long way to go on that very matter. We've begun the journey of inviting more international students to our school. We need to make sure that the richness of that experience is offered to all students, that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we have only international in one class and only domestic in others.
International students arriving in Canada, more than half of them report trouble making friends on campus, getting involved in campus activities, that academically they're doing fine, but socially there's a need for greater integration.
But I would say we have to actually make it front and center to be an inclusive and diverse college and culture. And we live in a small community, and there's not a lot of diversity around. So then we have to think about how we're going to create that, whether that's bringing in international educators, whether that's having sabbaticals that come to Fleming, we do exchanges, what we're going to do to reach out to the countries that can come to Fleming and create that rich experience for all of our students.
There are platforms available to set up online chat relationships with ambassadors on campus to sort of ease the transition for international students.
Years ago, Tony Blair talked about the global student. That global student is super global, and Fleming has to respond to that, and that's what we're going to be doing.
In a lot of ways, Canadians are more likely to have a passport than Americans are, but the smaller the community gets, the less cosmopolitan or international the community is. And so having that global perspective, which is increasingly important for the labor market, it's increasingly important for citizenship in our society, survival on social media, that becomes a critical thing for us to make sure that we're preparing our students for that global world, to be global citizens, to be employees and entrepreneurs who can be successful in a global economy rather than a purely local or national.
Yes, and that has to be something that is always front and center. It has to be accomplished through active participation. We can't just sit around and say we're going to be inclusive and diverse, but without action.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. You're fabulous. I appreciate it.
It was an interesting day.
Oh my God, we've got more to
For
come.
the afternoon.
Yes.
We have a world of higher ed innovations and bright ideas to bring you in the weeks ahead. Next week, Maureen and I discuss how to instill a culture of innovation on campus.
We've got to give the gift of time to the thinkers, the faculty, the front line in particular, and we have to also invest in our people.
To be sure you don't miss a thing, take a moment now to subscribe. And thanks for watching.
I don't actually know what questions you want to tackle. Do you want to talk about that? What would you like to talk about? I'm going to check my notes here.
You guys sound great. This is awesome.
So what's the best question for me to ask to get you into the trajectory you want to go here around inclusion and diversity?
Should I just start?
You give me what you want to say, and I'll think about a response to it.
Okay, good.